thanks for coming out, and Brian and Nicole and everybody here at CPW. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's geek out about vernacular photography. Does everybody know what the term vernacular means?
No.
Okay. Let's just use it as everyday photography, photography by unknown makers, objects by unknown makers. For Paige and me, one of the reasons we love photography is because we consider it a great language, and like any great language, it's hugely adaptable to change in new uses. We love photography because it's it's with us from birth to death. Okay, so our entire lives, photography is a part of our lives in some way, shape, or form, which is very unusual from other mediums and other aspects. So these examples are examples of how people lived with photography, what they did with it, how they told their stories, so on and so forth. So we're going to take we've put together a study collection for you from our new photo collection, which we call PhotoCircus. It's our pet name for the collection because we think of photography as these overlapping circles. You know, things like combine together in photography in unexpected ways. So it's science, it's art, it's craft, it's family history, it's storytelling. All these circles, like in the circus, there's all these things going on, and your attention is constantly going like this, and at the center is sort of, a kind of ringmaster, and in this case, it's photography as the ringmaster. We're interested in photographic culture and this aspect of photographic culture because it tells an expanded story of photography, and that really gets us going as artists to kind of take a deep dive and pull out the stories, especially nowadays. So let's just start with some examples of the first generation of photographic storytelling. This is a handmade album with tintypes. It's from 1878. Okay, this person sewed together and cut pieces of notebook paper, including slots for tintypes of their friends, and then have all these sort of hand wrote in pencil, all these different notes and things. So it's an exquisite object that really tells you, just soon after photography was invented, how people were making it their own. These are other examples. This is, we've opened it to this page. The entire album is full of these cutouts that this is from 1935, a young Mexican-American woman, her family somewhere in Southern California, mixing, probably things that she cut out of the newspaper with, putting heads of her family on to make these new compositions, so like collaging. This is an album page from 1940s album that was made by somebody in Detroit. Other pages, it's unbound. The album is unbound, and there are other pages from this album that contain a lot of ephemera of, Joe Louis, who was big in Detroit at that time. He lived in Detroit, and also going to the clubs in Detroit, where at that time it was very common to have somebody walk around the different tables and say, do you want to have your picture taken? And then they would put it into a folder. And so it was very common for photo albums to sort of double as scrapbooks, because it was all sort of souvenirs about the story of their lives. This is an unusual object that we wanted to share with you. Anybody know what this is? A what? It is a spy camera. Okay, it's the Expo camera. It's about 1910. It was sold as a camera novelty, and but it is interesting to note, and there are earlier examples of spy cameras, but it is interesting to note that just almost immediately when photography was invented, there were people that were finding all kinds of uses and hacks. And interestingly enough, you know, there's great examples in fine art photography, like Walker Evans and James Agee, when Walker Evans went on the subway with a secret camera that nobody could see. And then, you know, several years later, Stanley Kubrick, before he was a filmmaker, was a photographer. He was the youngest photographer ever to get hired at the Picture Post. And his first story was going into the subway with a spy camera and taking pictures of the subway riders. And so a lot of what we do in PhotoCircus is we make these links. And we couldn't bring everything with us today, but those two examples are in the collection as examples of sort of the ripple effect of something that starts out as a novelty that you can buy for 10 cents because it reflects a wider interest. It's sort of like, I liken it to kind of like the, you know, haute couture or, you know, the Paris runway. It starts out on the runway in Paris and then it, you know, eventually winds up in Target, you know? And so it's sort of like, you know, these inventions, these scientific inventions that get hacked and hacked and hacked by entrepreneurs to create souvenirs that people, photographic souvenirs that people could buy on the boardwalk. And other examples are, I should preface by saying that almost immediately, as soon as photography was invented, there was an interest in making it more three-dimensional, making it move, making it have color, like just doing things to make it more, right? So these are some examples of embroidered postcards, right? This one even has like human hair and a feather, right? How these went through these are from Spain from 1910, and how these went through the post office, I will not know. This is one of the famous bullfighter, Nicanor. Yes, thank you. And Ernest Hemingway and the sun, Ernest Hemingway was so, you know, Ernest Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises, and he was like super macho, really into, hey, Oliver. He was really into bullfighting, right? Really into bullfighting. And he loved Nicanor. Ernest Hemingway loved Nicanor so much he named his first son Nicanor. So these things have a way of being related to other things in popular culture and other. This is a photo montage postcard. People know what photo montage is. Again, 1910, an example of surrealism in photography, but it's just like a postcard. Publishers were always thinking of ways to interest people in buying postcards. And with photography, it just gave them more ways to alter photographs. This is another, like, I don't know what this person was thinking with this. I don't even know what this is, but I like it. You know, it's crazy. Movement, wanting things to move. This is a good example of the hack idea I was telling you about. This is from the late 1909. Moving picture. It's called life motion photograph. So wanting pictures to move, a lot of entrepreneurs and things, you can pass this around, wanting pictures to move after Edward Muybridge did all his motion studies, immediately there were all these like souvenirs that came out making pictures move. That you could buy on the boardwalk or in the Emporium or something like that. So making pictures move was this incredible scientific invention And then it just sort of trickles down, kind of like the way it is now. It's still not much has changed. And then this is, anybody like flip books? Yeah, okay. So you want to just stand up and give it a whirl and stand up and show people what you're doing?
Flip it.
I'm trying to figure out which flip is good. No. Oh, you can't see from here? I don't know which way it goes. Oh, wait. Can you play with this? It might be hard for doing for other people.
Okay, so,
No, it's not working, sorry.
okay,
I'll pass it.
all right, pass it around. Okay, so this is called the Quindex. This man took hundreds of photographs of his hands on the piano because he thought that it was a way to teach people how to play the piano. So just imagine this. He used photography. He used photography to teach people how to play the piano, but you can't hear anything. You can see the pictures. You can see his hands moving on the piano keys, but you can't hear anything. So, it's just all the ways that people were using photography to, in this case, teach people how to do something. 1909. This is some examples of altered pictures that we really like. Right, I think you know these. Oliver and I routinely look at the same things on eBay. Yes, right?
That was crazy.
That was crazy. Had to have them. And you can imagine, if they're really big, right? They'd be fantastic.
You never got a story behind those, did you?
No, never. So going back to motion for a minute, who was the one that was telling me about the Carrie Mae Weems? You, Carrie Mae Weems and ViewMaster. Everybody familiar with ViewMaster? Okay, ViewMaster, 1940s maybe, 30s, 40s, it was a viewer that there's a wheel.
They stayed around.
They're still around, right? And, now it's an artifact, right? It's this I love the fact that Instagram now uses reels because this is reels. But what you might not have known of is that you could buy a ViewMaster camera to make your own ViewMaster. And it was called ViewMaster Personal Reels. So you could buy the personal ViewMaster camera to make your own ViewMaster. And you got it looked like a tweezer thing, and because these things are small, but you could buy your whole outfit where you could make your own personalized reels. So we have the Badlands.
So you didn't send the film off and they made it for you? You have to
No,
actually make
you would, I have not gone down that rabbit hole. I was just really amazed that you could make your own reels. So you didn't know that, right? No. Anybody else know that? My aim tonight is to show you things you've never seen before, okay? All right, so again, riffing on this whole idea of making things three-dimensional, making things move, embellishing things, hand coloring things, making photographs three-dimensional. Okay, anybody know what this is? Yes, very good. Photosculptura is translates as photo sculpture. It's a Mexican tradition. Started again in the early 1900s, where typically traveling salesmen or in some way you wanted. It wasn't just to commemorate the dead, but it was also if you wanted to, celebrate somebody in your family, typically you give the photograph to the artisan who would then hand carve the bust and then adhere with several layers of chemicals, making it bigger, and then always hand coloring because they always wanted it to look lifelike. So they can get very ornate. This is a study collection, so we can pass around, you can touch it. But they can get very ornate with like jewelry and the whole thing. The American version, if you want to, and they were like, this is from the 40s, but the frame styles change. They can be very ornate. This is the back. Some of the ones we have the artist's name on the back from the workshop in Mexico. And, in Mexico, it was just really typical. You'd put it on top of the TV or, and the American version are called humanettes and statuettes. Here's another photo esculture. This one doesn't have a frame, but it's, I love this. Come on. Like the veil, that, you see how much more ornate this is than that? Her expression. The American version were called humanettes and statuettes. This is from 1920s. It came with this whole little scene, right? And here's the name of the photographer on the back, and then on the bottom, the statuette maker. And typically with these, you'd go to the camera shop, or you could send in the back of magazines to have. So one of the things we love to do in this collection is we have all the supporting ephemera, where you like the ads where you could send away for things. And we like everything that's connected with photography in the mail, because we love how photography at its center is about exchange. And, so much of photography went through the mail. You got your pictures developed in the mail. You sent away for stuff in the mail. Now we have it going through the airwaves, which is mail. It's a kind of mail. Here's another example of a statuette, where you notice the hand coloring. Okay, so I'm going to turn all this around. The other way that people lived with photography was personalizing their accessories. These are some fabulous. We buy photo rings as often as we can. We have several of them. We brought a few. These are photo rings. They came in sterling, silver-plated, bakelite, lucite, where, again, you could send away for these. There's also a story that we're trying to substantiate, which is that there was a prison reformer in Alcatraz who used to collect all the bakelite toothbrushes and combs, because bakelite, which predated plastic, when it's heated, it's very malleable. And so he had the prisoners kind of make rings of their sweethearts or children, which just seems kind of hard to believe. But we did find research. It's just like we're sort of afraid to kind of put it out there because we know somebody's going to say, wrong, prove it. And then this is a coat button. You can see that it's a button with a tintype in it. Oh, yeah, okay. We're going to pass this tray. We think it's from the Civil War because the man is sitting down, which is very unusual. So he may have been injured. More just jewelry featuring, photographs. And then, of course, the ID badge, which we have a large collection, which we call women in the workforce. And we love photo ID badges because they're like little time capsules. They tell the story of the company. Some of them are very ornate. And it's just a wonderful history of women in the workplace. So we can pass these around. Who wants to see this? Mary. Okay. Everybody with me still? Okay. Anybody know what this is? Anybody else want to guess? Okay, it is, what? Okay, it is called it's called a Necker's knob, a suicide knob, and a steering wheel knob, because power steering didn't appear in cars until 1951. So if you wanted to steer and make out, they call it a suicide knob because if, God forbid, something is happening and you only had one hand on the wheel, this wasn't going to help you. So we are used to seeing these with like pinup girls, but then there's a whole lot of people that put loved ones, mothers, something like, we have some ones that like, really? You're driving and you're looking at that? I don't know. Anyway, stamps that you could also send away for. And the stamps you could pretty much, they started making photo stamps in about the late 1800s. We have in the collection a catalog of all the different styles of stamps that you could get. So, and you can still get stamps with your face on them. So what's important to note is that, again, almost as soon as photography was invented, you had people personalizing their steering wheel knobs, embellishing their stamps. You know, if anybody wants to see these, just, okay. Yes.
You could use the stamps or no? They were
What?
just decorative stamps.
They were decorative stamps. They didn't actually have real postage on them.
But you can actually buy them if you're postage.
You
I
can.
did it with my kids like 10 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, I still have them at home.
Neat.
Post office offer.
I just think it's bizarre. Your face is going through the mail, you know. Okay, so, you know, in a lot of ways, there are connections between photography and pop culture in many expected and unexpected ways. This is a salesman sample of Life magazine. We couldn't fit the full size in our suitcase, and the way we like to present it is this is the salesman sample, and then there's the actual premiere issue, and then there's the 10th year anniversary, and all three feature this photograph by Margaret Burke White. Okay, and everybody familiar with Margaret Burke White? Okay, so this is 1936, I think, 1936. Yeah, it says 19, what?
What is that photo of?
It's Fort Peck Down. It's, Burke White worked for the Works Progress Administration and photographed a lot of places around America and the states of things that were happening in America at that time. She was, I would say, somewhat known and pretty radical for a woman. And this is another thing I will tell you about our collection and the way that Paige and I work, is that we're very, no surprise, female-centric. We really want to highlight the ways that women worked in photography or what they made with photography. And so we're very fond of Margaret Burke White. We know Walker Evans gets a lot of airtime, and we wish Margaret Burke White got more of that same kind of attention now, okay? So in Life magazine, so here we have a comic book also from the late 30s. And why this is notable is because comic books were mainly made for boys. Okay, all the advertising, everything was mainly made for boys. And on the cover of this comic book is, can you all see it?
Mm-hmm.
The world's most famous war photographer was a girl, Margaret Burke White. And there she is, Margaret Burke White. And her whole story is lady with the lens, right? And they tell her whole story of her photography career, how she went on to, photograph in Russia, and meet Gandhi, and the whole thing, right? Pretty notable for that time period. Then a photographer who also wanted to publish comic books, this is in 1944, Camera Comics. There were only 9 issues. It wasn't a big hit, there were a lot of, again, comic books were mainly for boys, and there were a lot of the war, and there were like all kinds of hideous ads about photography and using photography and how all this kind of stuff. Okay, but the first action female, I always get the first female action photographer comic book figure was Linda Lenz. And who was she modeled after? Margaret Burke White. So you have this fictionalized version of Margaret Burke White, which is interesting because, well, it is interesting, frankly, but then it went on to be like, I can't remember there's been 3 movies about Margaret Burke White. We have photographs from all those movies, including Candice Bergen playing Margaret Burke White in the film Gandhi, Farrah Fawcett playing Margaret Burke White in the 70s. And you might be familiar with Nicole Kidman playing, Arbus in Fur. And then now we're going to get Kate Winslet, who's going to, come out in the film Lee, who's playing Lee Miller. So comic books, we love, obviously we love a lot of things, but we love comic books because comic books, there's all these different threads about photography. There's the evil camera. There's the good camera. There's the evil photographer. There's the photographer that fights crime with his camera or her camera. There's Friday Foster, which we don't have with us here, but you'll just have to believe me. Friday Foster was a comic strip in the Chicago Tribune about this fashion model turned photographer in Manhattan. And the comic strip was so popular that they made like one comic book called Friday Foster. And then Pam Grier played Friday Foster in the blaxploitation movie Friday Foster in the 70s. So there's all these interrelationships where these lives of photographers are invented or they're made into these forms that the public devours as entertainment.
Was Jimmy Olsen a photographer? Superman?
It's Spider-Man. It's Jimmy Olsen was a photographer. Peter Parker was a photographer. If you look into the whole relationship of photographers in movies, Antonioni's blow up, it's endless. Endless. Well, I'll leave that to you. Okay. Then again, talking about kids and photography, because kids, one of the things about George Eastman and the Kodak Brownie camera was that he was a master marketer, and he knew that the thing to do was to get kids hooked on photography as soon as possible. And so part of his whole thing was anybody could do it, even a child could do it. You press the button, we do the rest. And a lot of their ads were featuring children taking pictures of other children, and children taking pictures of their cats and dogs, and women in the darkroom. And it's true today. All the kids are hooked on photography. People know more about photography than they think they know because they're constantly looking at pictures and taking pictures. So this is truly an unusual object. It's called, did anybody collect baseball cards when they were a kid? Okay, all right, you're gonna love this. Okay, so before Topps made baseball cards, they made Hocus Focus magic photo chewing gum. Okay, with this groovy mid-century modern design. Again, well, maybe it's not mid-century, 1940s, but I love the design. Okay, so underneath this wrapper, there was a card, right, with a quiz question, and then the instructions, okay? In order to answer the question, and this was, you know, about some baseball pitcher and how many pitches and some sports thing. And, and in order to answer the question, you had to dip the card in water. But kids were so impatient, they would just spit on the card. Okay? So the result was a photograph, right? But it was so smudgy and overexposed, underexposed, right? It was a colossal failure. It did, like, right? They're awful pictures. So you get this wad of gum, this big wad of gum, and you get to make a photograph, right? It was after this, Topps was like, well, this, you know, this is a business failure. What do we do now? It was after this that they started making baseball cards. So in a sense, you could say that this is a baseball card. This is like a very like early baseball card.
Prototype.
What? Yes,
Prototype.
exactly. So this is a photo. This is an incredible, example of a photo object. You got design. You got like sports. You got like make your own photo. You get like a sugar buzz, right?
DNA sample.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
And very rare because it was a failed business.
Yes. Do we know what chemical? I'm kind of relying on you all for that. I don't know, because you can still, there's a lot of novelties, again, that you could get into novelty catalogs and stuff where you would dip the photo. Like there's one, it's like, it's a race, it's a horse race. In order to know which horse won, you have to dip the, there's a lot of that. And I don't know what the chemical is, but it's got to be something pretty straightforward and non-toxic, unless. Right, it was probably like radium or something, right? Like the clocks, Okay, anybody know what this is? Yes. So again, another example, it's a postcard. And it's also a record, so it's a shellacked photograph that then wax grooves that you would put on a 78. Now there's, 45, thank you. And there's a long relationship between photography and music, starting with, that could be like a whole separate talk, but in the 1930s or late 1920s, the very first vinyl came out that had photographs on it. So, the big records that had, now we tip picture discs, which were popular in the 80s, actually go all the way back to the 20s. And then these, I don't know why there's a 1940s photograph of, I don't know what this person is doing, some kind of, and the photograph is Johnny Mercer's Bernadine from the 50s. So these two things don't go together at all, which makes it all the more wonderful. And then it was sent through the mail. Now, when I was a kid, these were called, they put them on the backs of cereal boxes, and they were called flexi records because they're flexible. Okay, so yeah, at some point we'll have some big Instagram thing, probably where we actually play the record or something, got to work up to that. Okay, when do you think the first disposable camera was invented? When do you think, Brian? Any idea?
A
No.
couple years ago?
Anybody?
Earlier than Bill.
Yeah.
Anybody? Okay. I thought prior to going down the rabbit hole of of disposable cameras, I thought 70s. I thought 70s. But no, 1940s. Again, you would get it, the camera would come in the box, loaded with film. This still has film in it. The instructions, the return label. You would take the pictures and then you'd send it back.
How many pictures?
I don't know. I knew you were going to ask me a question. I don't know. Now, the thing that was interesting about this is that they came in a variety of styles. They were given away oftentimes as marketing tools by like car salesmen and things like that. You buy a car and get a disposable camera. And so some of them are made to look like fancy cameras. Some of them look just kind of encore, do it again, let's do it again. And it was first invented by this man in Dallas, because he was like, I never have a camera when I need one. Like, I just need to be able to grab a camera and go. And that's this camera. So speaking of prototypes, we like to think of this as the very first iPhone. Because this is a wallet from the 1960s. Right?
Designed by chiropractor.
Everything is in this wallet. Absolutely everything. There are newspaper clippings and prayer cards and photographs of and Jesus and a photo booth picture and the wallet, and this was a woman's wallet because her name is in it. So it wasn't just a guy thing, right? And what do we do now? We have on our bodies in some way, shape, or form, we're carrying all this stuff around. So the thing I love about vernacular is the human nature aspect of it. That, yeah, we have a lot of new technology, but the human impulses to keep loved ones close by wearing them, or to make things more dimensional, or to carry it all in one place hasn't really changed that much. And so, okay, so this is our last object. Does anybody know what this is? Okay, anybody else? Anybody know anything more about it? You do. I know you do.
It could be a pinhole camera.
Could be. Okay, so this is an interesting example of when high and low meet, and vernacular photography and fine art photography. And okay, so this is a Hills Brothers coffee can. Hills Brothers headquarters were in San Francisco. Ansel Adams' mother worked for Hills Brothers Coffee. And Hills Brothers wanted to make decorative coffee cans so you'd keep their coffee can longer on your shelf, right? Good marketing idea, right? So they asked Adams if
you keep it longer on your shelf, you don't buy a new one.
Or maybe
you get brand loyalty. Maybe you buy another one. You use the coffee. They just wanted you to have the coffee can as a decoration, because you're always going to make the association with Hills Brothers Coffee. So he agreed. Ansel Adams was also a master marketer, Mr. Zone System, Mr. Perfect Print. He, like Margaret Burke White, was in all kinds of ads selling everything. I failed to say that, but Margaret Burke White sold everything from wine to cigarettes to washers and dryers and televisions. So did Ansel Adams, right? No reservation about using the media to market, to possibly have greater visibility, right? So he said, sure, I'll put, and so you have, here's the name. It's a winter morning in Yosemite Valley, Ansel Adams, 1969. So if you own this coffee can, you own an original Ansel Adams. It's a photo object, but it's a limited edition Ansel Adams, right? Okay, well, it caused a shitstorm in the fine art photo community, which was still trying to find its bearings in 1969, because if you think about it, the photo market didn't really develop until the 80s. And people were like, how could you do that? You're selling out, you know? And Imogen Cunningham, who's a very close friend of his, was so pissed off that there's two versions of the story. One version of the story is that she took the can and she filled it with dog poop and she put it on his doorstep. And then the other version is she took the can and she put a pot plant in it and put it on his doorstep. Either way, you get the picture. She was pissed. A lot of photographers were pissed because how could you put one of your art photographs on a commercial object? On the walls, we have some pictures from an exhibition we did based on our book, Caption This, which we have, which was the last book we did, about the things that people wrote on the back and front of their photographs. And the reason we did this book was because we wanted to acknowledge that we're in the heyday of captioning. We caption our lives every day on social media. But the way that we do it now is somewhat different because we can rewrite and delete, and we're posting, you know, we're uploading an image and then doing the text, and they're sort of separate even though they appear together, and they will eventually drift away from one another. So whereas these, we have the voice of the person who made the text, whereas nowadays it's hard to know what will happen. We think these are really interesting if you are interested, if you consider the relationship between image and text, that no matter how powerful the image, the caption, the text always has the last word. And that is something I don't think is discussed enough. You know, there are a lot of photographers that use image and text, and when you have a layer of text, it gives voice, and that is a different experience of the photograph. It adds another layer, which is like an aura of like the person. And, you know, I mean, some of them are really funny. Some of them, like, if we didn't have the text, like, we're bringing our contemporary sensibility to looking at these pictures. Right? I'm sorry. I feel like, and you know, nowadays, I mean, I don't know if anybody agrees or disagrees, but if we only saw that picture on the left, we might think something totally different based on our lives today. Whereas then you flip it over and you read the caption and you have a totally different experience of it. Similarly with this is an outline of me. I don't really know what's going on there, but when I take my contemporary sensibility, you know, my first reaction is, oh my God, this person is really like having a hard time, or some, you know, it seems kind of dark. On the other hand, maybe not. Like, we will never know. Or burning the old sofa over there. You know, it has a very contemporary vibe to it. You know, I can't even tell you how many musicians have offered to throw large sums of money at us because they want to use that for their record album cover, right? Now, I don't know why that is striking a chord for musicians, but, you know, anyway, so we wanted to share these with you. Again, we champion what everybody here at the CPW does, and so, you know, we wanted to make the effort to put these prints up, and if anybody wants one, we're selling them for $100 a pop, and we have the special on the books. We'd love it. Paige and I would love it if you would follow us on Instagram, Project B Photos. And I don't know how we're doing on time. Does anybody have any questions?
First question.
All right. Anybody? Okay, Al.
On this statuette of the Mexican man, there's 3 little grass, like grass,
Yes.
one missing.
Yes,
What were those for?
glass.
Okay.
So the ones that are like really minty, they have glass in the front and glass in the back. And they're very hard to find because, you know, they don't usually serve. And these were like typically carpenter's tacks that would hold the glass. And it's also, it's common to find like something like this, and then somebody will fit it into a frame. And so you find ones that are sort of refurbished. Like if you're really looking for the minty ones, but you know, they're all great. So any other questions? Yes.
I wanted to go back to something you said at the beginning about photography working in a similar way as clothing going from haute couture to
Mhm.
Target.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I think about photography, and especially vernacular photography, I think about it more as going from like the state to the boardwalk, starting with a lot of surveillance and information gathering, and then skipping any sort of elite audience and going straight to the boardwalk. And the ways that like photography and movies were really shunned as an art form for so long, for decades in the beginning. And that like vernacular photography was king, you know, like this stuff, when I think about early ways that the people manipulated photography, and when I think about like the first like real art photographers, I think also about like the bad kids of art, like surrealists, Dadaists, and the ways it was kind of pushing back against like what art was. And so just curious if.
Well, it's an interesting comment. Anybody want to jump in on that? Or, I mean, I can show you, to your point about the surrealists, this is an example. And I wish we had brought it, but we didn't. Like Paul Rand, who was a very famous designer, collaborated with Man Ray on a cigar box. Another example of, but this is happening at the same time. And it was just considered a novelty, a postcard novelty that you would buy. Now it's in museums. So,
Okay. But then it wasn't like, instead of like haute couture to Target, it's more like Target to haute couture.
Sure,
Yeah.
that's true. I think that's an interesting point, and I will no longer use that comment in my.
You can, I was just curious.
No.
That's really interesting. So there was like, I know that photography hasn't been used in bureaucratic ways and stuff. But and one always thinks of it as being such a democratic medium, but was there sort of a period before it was, and I guess it was studio photography, and it was a while before it really became vernacular.
Well, like
Snapshot everyday stuff.
what predated photo ID badges was the military use of photo IDs. The military was the first agency to use photo
That's what I
IDs.
meant by like the state,
Yeah.
like surveillance, Ellis Island,
Yeah.
Military.
Well, police
whatever.
photography
Right.
and so on. But I guess what I was thinking was like, this is a really good example of, you know, Muybridge and motion photography advancements in cinema. And then, you know, you have these entrepreneurs that are trying to capitalize on the fascination with moving pictures. And so they make a version that can be sold on the boardwalk for really cheap. So I guess in a way, it's interesting your comment, because it could go both ways, which is very much about vernacular photography. There are infinite possibilities.
I just want to have a comment and a question. You know, as Barbara and I have talked in the past, when I sort of became interested in vernacular photography, I was really interested in it as something that had suddenly become available on the internet, like everywhere. And you could suddenly, you didn't have to go to flea markets, it was just kind of everywhere. And one of the things I loved about Barbara and Paige is they were like really generous. Like many people would put their things on the internet and assume that they still had some kind of control over it when they did that. So if I would post them or comment on them, a lot of people got very angry that they owned the picture, because they did physically own the object, but they didn't. I never saw that as something that would prevent me from just sharing it with other people, because I thought it was interesting, which I think you guys agreed with. But what was interesting to me is that I didn't have much interest in the physical object.
Well, now you do.
Well, I very much do. What's interesting is this is sort of where I have a question for you, because I teach photography, and almost all of my students now, graduate, undergraduate, doesn't matter, almost all of them want to be in the darkroom. And I find it really fascinating, which isn't to say that they don't have a really active life on Instagram, with their digital cameras, with their phones usually and stuff. But there is something, I think, as we lose the objectness of the world in general, but certainly in photography, as it becomes this kind of closed set, they become very interested in it. And I have my own sort of thoughts on why that is, but I'm curious if you guys, what you think
I think you've hit like on a lot of it, which is that, you know, Paige, you and I talk about this a lot. It's wanting to have more of an experience and wanting to interact with the materials, you know.
Is it more of an experience? Like, I mean, it's.
Yes, it is. It is.
How?
Well, for us, I mean, I can
For you, I understand.
I can speak, well, I can speak to, like, okay, so this newest collection about objects, we were very, like, we love images. We love images. We were like, you know, let's do something that is more like, tells a story about photography that people are not as familiar with. Like, we could have come in and we could have shown you a PowerPoint with lots of like hilarious pictures, for example. But it was like, you know what, you all know that already. You do. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't have had a great time, but how does that add to anything? Whereas the objects and in the inventive ways that people either went up the escalator or down the escalator are really inspiring. It's inspiring because whether you are an educator or a maker or a historian or just an enthusiast, it inspires you to look at the stuff around you in a different way, I think. I don't know, does anybody agree with that?
Well, I think that when there's a physicality to something, it puts you in direct connection between it and the thing and yourself. Whereas, I guess I would just go as far as to ask, do you feel like there's a difference between the experience of looking at something on the screen and you know, looking at like a Robert Frank or a Sally Mann or on the wall in front of you? I mean, it to me, it just always was profoundly different.
Well, to me, they're both great experiences. I love experiencing images online. I love experiencing physical things. I find these much more interesting. To me, this is just me personally, a Robert Frank on the wall isn't that much better than one on the screen, but that's just me. I mentioned the image, but I do for my students. So I think I love the experience of objects. I love listening to a record, and I love listening to live music. I like both experiences. Record. Whatever you call them. My kids might listen to records, by the way, because they're scratches and they're a physical thing you can hold. But I think, I guess with my students, I think it's also about validating, because we all have these things in our pockets that take amazing photographs, technically, whether we know how to take pictures or not. And we can take so many of them, and they're paying a lot of money to study photography. I think this is slightly cynical, but I think also they want to feel like they're doing something that everybody can do. And they make the mistake, I think, of locating that in the skill of making a photograph.
And there's not much magic in the phone photography or the instant photography. I mean, there was magic in the Polaroids, but there's a kind of alchemy, you know,
I think there's magic in both.
Yeah, I mean, but however you find your magic, you know, that people are even attempting to find it is kind of why we love this so much, because, you know, any kind of joy that anything can bring us right now is a gift, you know, like, let's go for it, you know. And this material, what we found, right? I mean, Paige and I have been sharing in this way, which is very different for us. And to your point, like the physicality of the objects that are not in a museum that they have to pay to see, that are not under a vitrine, that they can see the real scale of things. You know, when it's a very different experience. It doesn't mean that all the experiences are not pleasurable. It's like looking at a photograph in a book is different than looking at it on a wall, is different than looking at it on your laptop or sitting in the dark and looking at it projected. But there is, I think that we've gotten so used to seeing things backlit online that some of the handmade qualities are, we don't even get to enjoy that because we don't even have the opportunity to see things like in real life, so to speak.
So do you collect, and I'm sorry, I came in late, so maybe you talked about this, but do you guys collect memoriam sculptures and things like?
If we like them.
But is there a word for that? What do they call them? Like when they would,
Memento moris, you mean?
would they use photographs to build like monuments to people after they died or
Sure,
something?
of course. That's
Because I
like if you go to some of the graveyards in Europe,
think-
like the photographs are in the tombstones, you know what I mean? And yeah, I mean, people have used photography for everything.
Because that's something I think that really needs to be a physical thing to evoke memory.
Yeah,
I think the physical thing.
yeah. So if you have a souvenir, just like we keep photographs, people love souvenir. I love souvenirs. So the whole idea of mixing, you know, having a photographic souvenir, you know, and then combining writing or making it three-dimensional or somehow, I mean, I can't even tell you the amount of young people who they are in school and they're not, and they want to do things like embroider or crochet on their photographs, and they're getting like crap for it because it's not fine art. And then it's like they see something like this and they're like, oh my God.
I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Of course they can, but it really depends on how the teacher's teaching, or, you know, and if we're referencing art school or art school, I should say, art school. And my own story, you know, I went to the San Francisco Art Institute for photography and had teachers that some of which are very famous now. And, you know, for my final project or whatever, did vernacular photography, and I was roundly dismissed, laughed at, because I didn't press the button. Right? So to now, because we're in a digital culture and there's a new appreciation for analog and for photography's relationship on a broader level, now there's an appreciation. But before, there was just like this silo. This is photography and this is how it has to be. And, you know, I don't go for that, obviously. But any other question? Yes.
Yeah, my question is related to that comment, actually. There's the actions that you're engaging in of like searching for, obtaining, and then presenting and making projects out of all of these materials. I was wondering how you view those actions in relation to being either or and an archivist, a collector, and an artist.
All three. I mean, we consider the collection as our medium. That's how we understand it. That it's a creative act. That's why when we feel like the collection is completed, we try to move it on. We try to sell it as a completed piece. We use the word collection or personal archive. You know, they're all applicable because vernacular is about the in-between spaces. And so as artists, we're kind of navigating those spaces and we're developing language like everything we're talking about now, the language is sort of being developed as we have these conversations. And as more writers write, but again, we need more voices. We need more female voices. We need different voices, because it's not just about collecting, and it's not just about who has the most of this and the best of that. It's really about context and how to invite people in to tell the broader story of photography and how we all live with photography. And it's just my opinion. Yes, right.
What was the nature of your project at the San Francisco Art Institute? How did you use vernacular photographs at that time? And how did you see it at the time in relation to the fine art photography that you were being encouraged to make?
Yeah. I certainly didn't use the word vernacular. And, if anybody can come up with a good word, they'll, the whole photography community will, anoint you. But I thought of it as found photos, and I basically just push pin them to the wall like a big rambling cluster of found photographs. And then on the floor, I had like lots of like plastic camera, like the Diana camera, for instance, and everything. And then at the very top, which probably was weird, but at the very top, I had an old Coca-Cola sign, because I was like, the pause that refreshes, right? And I was trying in my own, way at that time to talk about, popular, like that we're all taking pictures all the time. And that I knew, I had to make a living, so I went to graduate school for museology, because I knew I was never going to make it as a photographer, because I saw all the photographs that were being like held up as like good examples, and I'm like, I'm never going to be able to do that, and I wasn't interested in it. I really felt genuinely like every picture had already been taken. And I know that I'm not alone in that feeling, but I felt like that qualified as a final project. And it was like, I got absolutely no support at all. Like, not like, just it, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, that's for real.
Do you still feel that way?
What, that every picture has already been? I do. I think.
Do you get surprised?
Do I get surprised? I get, I'm still curious, and I get surprised. I think context is very important. Yeah, sometimes I get surprised. Like the things that did anybody see the Wolfgang Tillmans? Not Wolfgang Tillmans. Who was the guy, the retrospective at MoMA not that long ago? Wolfgang Tillmans, right? Wolfgang Tillmans. Thank you.
Stephen Shore.
Yeah, that blew me away.
Yeah.
Like, because I had seen little things here and there that I didn't really pay that much attention to. But when I saw it all together, and the way that, and like, I love that he was involved in the installation, that just, like swoon, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm surprised.
And I can see where your attraction to that is actually. Vernacular.
Yeah, because he worked in many different areas of photography. It wasn't just,
Right.
Yeah. So
he can make a picture look like it was like found on the ground, behind the grocery store.
Yeah.
And the trash. That is just amazing, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like,
And I do like that. Like, I like facsimiles of things, and I I like all that. But again, it depends. It just depends,
Mhm.
you know. But yeah. Anybody else have a comment or question? Oh, hi.
Apologies, I was also late. And I'd like to ask a clarifying question and a question around that. So you make collections
Yes.
around a topic, and then those are that's your medium, and then you sell that.
Correct.
You sell those works. Do you then also consider the way that whoever purchases the work, their presentation of it to be part of the process of the work itself? Do you have any say in how you want it presented afterward, or do you like it to be participated?
Sore topic. Yeah.
Okay, guys.
No, good question though. Good question.
Well, there's context again, right?
Yeah.
Context.
So, I mean, one of the reasons that Paige and I are doing this now is because we always hope that when a museum acquires one of our collections, that they're active with it. But that can be tricky, and once they own it, we don't really have any say-so. And so we're trying to do now things that we wish those organizations would do. And we're just like, well, we'll just go do it ourselves. And I think that the next, when we sell PhotoCircus, you know, at whatever point that is, I think that hopefully it will be with an organization that is interested in it being an active collection. And there are many ways that it can be active. Yeah.
That would be my next question is, are there multiple ways you could see the collection installed?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Tell us more about the active ways.
The active ways? Well, you could certainly do like social, like conversations, you know, where there's a study collection within the collection so that people can actually get up close and personal, you know, and then can relate when they go and see stuff installed in a museum. They've had an actual hands-on experience themselves. There can be a series of small publications, for example, where different writers are invited in. So you have all these different voices talking about their experience. You can invite artists to be artists in an archive, for instance. So those are a few examples. You know, I think that we're working on something now where we're trying to express these links that we're talking about and how you can express that in an exhibition. Because a lot of exhibitions that you see about this material tend to be chronological. You know, they start with the Brownie camera and they start with things that, you know, they're very well known and they are grounding, but they're not necessarily inspiring about how these things are linked to other things and other mediums and other makers and, you know, science and all this kind of stuff. So we're constantly working on it, which is why we love having conversations like this, because, you know, you all have experience with, you know, photography and how it relates to your life and things that you see in museums and things like that. So
Never seen Hocus Pocus.
no, that's right. Any other questions?
Have you met anyone that remembers that film?
The Hocus Pocus?
Because you said that people would lick it, but how did you know the artist?
Oh, because Topps has a really incredible archive. This was considered like, it was really common for candy companies to create stimulators to stimulate sales. So they had a lot of like really interesting ways that they tried to sell stuff. And they have an amazing archive, as you can imagine. So it's well documented in the archive, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, well, you know, yeah, like, you know, and we could try it at some point later, but, you know, so, yeah.
Is thinking earlier, this is just an open comment, I'm still thinking about your question over here. And my answer to it, I think, yeah, you said the brain or something like that, when I was thinking that. My own experience of photography, generally it's just vision, it's on flat surface. But this 3D, this tactile nature of it, and even the captions that were, part of my brain is looking at the image and then bringing in the reading of this and then combining this. That's, in the neural net in my brain, that's two areas that are connecting over something that maybe only one area did before. And I also think there's like a meaning in the difficultness or the challenge of, say, developing film, or just getting these interactions or the craft of it. That's where part of the meaning is. And today, I see people typing on old typewriters just to get a poem out in a bar, and it's kind of a hipster thing, right? That all these examples have been given, but I think part of that difficulty and appreciating connecting to older generations of how 100 years ago, 150 years ago, how people did it, how my great grandfather did it. I think that's a connection that is kind of lost in a society that just wants the latest thing, the latest technology. And I'm a guy who studied the future when I was a kid, and I didn't really care about the past as much. But these are amazing objects to touch history.
Well said.
Literally touch history.
But it's interesting, I was talking to some students today, I was doing some teaching, and they were just going on and on nostalgically about CDs.
Yes.
So everything becomes, there will be a generation that will look back on the early AI and go like, oh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't type, you didn't talk.
Right.
Well, that was gonna say this earlier. One, my students are obsessed with digital cameras from the early 2000s.
Sure. Quick time.
Right? Because, or just like the nature of how it looks. They can
Yeah.
spot it, and it's the same way that I was really obsessed with things from the 70s and the early 90s. Like that was the thing. And I also think about, in terms of tactility, yes, I completely believe that people want to relate to something physical, but I think that there's actually a process in development as an artist where in your early 20s, late teens, you really want to show your hand. Whereas when you are a successful photographer, you're gonna have your photos spotted, you want to make it look pristine, right? Same with if you're typesetting a book, you want to make it look perfect. And but when you're 18 and you're making a book, you want it to be a punk flyer, And I think it's in my day, everyone was really obsessed with Holga cameras or pinhole cameras.
Lomography.
Because of their wonkiness and the surprise and development. They're kind of like a hocus pocus gum in a lot of ways. And then I think that students now feel like they can't actually get that with their cameras, so they have to go analog in order to show that.
Yeah.
They can use filters.
Well,
Totally. But you know what I mean? It's
But there's huge markets for selling. You can choose every film.
That's
style
right.
and every kind of scratch.
That's right.
wild.
That's right.
To digitally.
I mean, now, what do I give friends for gifts? I give them a box, an unopened box of Kodachrome film. It's oh my God, it's Kodachrome film in the original box, and it's okay, wow,
I wanted to say something about your comment again, right? Because I'm someone that feels strongly about physicality. So I feel maybe your students feel I feel the fact that we are in a three-dimensional physical world makes a difference. And as an artist, I think when you develop the picture from beginning to end, including taking it, and even after with reactions and such, and what you do with the picture, it's a whole process. And it makes to me, it's something special. Because it's if you're reading a book on a screen, as opposed to actually flipping through the book. And then stuff like that, for me, when it switched from books to digital, it had me upset because I remembered some of the best memories as a kid. Is reading amazing stories, and when it gets that little crinkly thing on the end, and it's it reminds you that you spent the whole summer turning pages or something. So I just think it's like a special nostalgic moment to develop it physically.
And it's physical. Let's remember that.
But I think.
You know, you're using not just your eyes,
Right.
you're using you're using more of your body, right? Anyway.
Like, it could be both. I think they're just two different things. Like, I think that,
Mhm.
like I said, most of my students, while they want to be doing all of this stuff, they also spend a huge amount of time every day engaged with photography. Much more time engaged with this, with photography that way. So I think that they have both experiences. What's interesting to me though is that the art experience for them is one that they want to slow down more and make a physical object. And I have like a cynical take on that, and I have a positive.
Oh, what a surprise.
But I think I have both. I mean, I think that like, I think nostalgia is like a really great thing. That's really dangerous
Yeah.
thing too. It's tough.
Yeah.
At its worst, it could be making America great again. Sorry,
Yeah.
everybody. At its best, it can be
Yeah.
like, evoking something. else.
Well, we're trying, I don't, neither Paige nor I are interested in nostalgia. It's not like we believe in the good old days. We see these as like touchstones, as anchors, as storytellers, as inspiring to tell just sort of an expanded story. Whatever people bring, whatever way we can invite people in, is what we are interested in. We're and I think that's it. We just we're interested in photography as a language, and like any language, it's very flexible, open to interpretation. Photography is a very complicated language, and depending on who you talk to and what they're interested in. The wonderful thing about vernacular is that there are infinite possibilities, and it's always open for interpretation. So I think, anybody else before yes, Mary.
I just was going to say thank you for
Oh.
helping me see and others how to see photography in a different light.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. What? Oh.
That's a great way to end it.